So imagine you're listening to this drum beat, right? And the snare drum hits, like just a fraction of a millisecond too late.
Or maybe the kick drum is rushing, just a little bit ahead of the grid.
Exactly. Now, to any sound engineer, that's just a mistake. And to a club DJ, I mean, it's a total train wreck that will instantly clear the dance floor.
Oh, absolutely. It's a disaster in a normal context.
But when Richard D. James, who most people know as Aphex Twin, when he programs those exact rhythmic collapses, something impossible happens. Instead of sounding broken, it sounds, I mean, incredibly magnetically alive.
Yeah, it creates this intense sensation of physical momentum. The listener is pulled forward not by the predictability of the rhythm, but by the sheer tension of it almost falling apart.
Right, and that razor-thin line between complete acoustic collapse and stunning beauty is really our focus today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got a great stack of sources today, mostly centered around this really fascinating philosophical column exploring the experimental techno of Aphex Twin.
And we're pairing that with some extensive notes on the wider industrial and experimental landscape of the 1990s and 2000s, just to give it all some context.
Yeah, so our mission for you today is to explore a paradox. How can music that sounds completely chaotic and unpredictable actually be this carefully designed masterpiece of order?
We're essentially looking at an artist who dismantled the very idea of a musical genre and a public persona, really. And in the process, he provided a blueprint for how to handle complex, overwhelming information.
Totally. And just to be clear, even if you've never listened to electronic music in your life, this deep dive is fundamentally about the nature of creativity in an age of information overload. We are finding that sweet spot between absolute control and utter chaos.
Which is really the secret to making something unforgettable.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our source column brings up this core contradiction right away. In traditional music, you rely on these guide wires of understanding.
Right, the familiar structure.
Exactly. You have a melody you anticipate or a steady 4/4 rhythm that's kind of anchoring the track. But with Aphex Twin, those guide wires are just intentionally severed. The beats fracture. Melodies dissolve into static, yet listeners still find it profoundly beautiful. Why are they drawn to something so structurally hostile?
Well, what's fascinating here is how this music interacts with human perception. When you listen to classical music, your brain is actively parsing harmonic logic.
Trying to figure it out.
Exactly. Or when you listen to pop music, you're anticipating the resolution of a chord progression, right? Those are learned analytical frameworks. But Aphex Twin's experimental techno often bypasses that analytical processing center entirely.
Oh, interesting. So it just skips the brain's logic center.
Pretty much. It bombards your auditory cortex with so much complex data and so quickly that your brain just sort of gives up trying to map it. And when the analytical brain surrenders, the sound hits your body and your emotional centers directly.
Wow. So it's like a more primitive, intuitive experience. It updates the way you understand rather than just giving you a conventional structure to understand.
Precisely. It forces your sensory operating system to adapt in real time.
I look at it this way. Traditional music is like driving down a paved highway with really clear street signs. You know exactly where the chorus is, you know where the bridge is coming up.
You can see miles ahead.
Right. But listening to Aphex Twin is like off-roading in the pitch black. There are no signs. But the car you are driving has a miraculously perfect suspension system. You're bouncing over these massive boulders, but you don't crash.
That's a great analogy.
So technically speaking, if the tempo is constantly shifting and the beat is constantly collapsing, what is that suspension system actually made of? How does it hold together?
Well, the suspension system is this invisible microscopic order. The chaos is really just a facade. Take those collapsing drum patterns we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
In electronic music, drum machines are naturally quantized, meaning every single hit snaps perfectly to a rigid mathematical grid. It's flawless, which is why it often feels a bit sterile or robotic.
Right, it lacks that human feel.
Exactly. Aphex Twin programs extreme complexity, sometimes pushing 300 beats per minute, but he manually shifts individual hi-hats or snares off that grid by mere milliseconds.
Wait, really? He's manually inserting human deviations into a machine?
Yes, and not just randomly. He's programming the subtle hesitations and rushes of a live, physical drummer. So while the macro structure sounds like a machine exploding, your body detects that microhuman swing.
Oh, wow.
Your body wants to move to it because it recognizes a biological signature buried right inside the digital noise. Furthermore, the source notes he doesn't use rhythm to divide time, he uses it to sculpt time.
Okay, sculpting time sounds beautifully poetic, but how does someone actually do that in a studio?
Well, rather than laying down a 4-bar loop and just filling it with notes, he uses extreme delay and feedback loops that blur the boundaries of a measure.
So the measure itself kind of melts.
Right. A snare hit might echo, and that echo actually becomes the bass line of the next measure, which then warps in pitch and becomes the melody. The sounds themselves dictate the shape of time, rather than a metronome forcing the sounds into a neat little box.
Which obviously takes incredible technical mastery. But looking at his timeline, I actually want to push back on the source's narrative a bit here.
Oh, how so?
Well, the column outlines his discography chronologically. It starts in 1992 with selected ambient works, 85 to 92, which really built the foundation of ambient techno with these warm, floating synths.
A legendary album?
Totally. Then you go to 1994's Volume 2, where rhythm completely vanishes into massive acoustic drums. Then you jump to 1999's Window Licker, which is this bizarre mutation of R&B and avant-garde noise.
Right.
And then you have 2001's Drukqs, which is hyper-violent drill and bass drums colliding with, like, quiet piano playing. The notes try to frame this as an evolution, and I just don't buy that.
You don't see it as an evolution. No, because when an artist evolves, you can trace a linear progression of their sound. You see them iterate. With Aphex Twin, it's not progression. It feels like he's constantly teleporting to entirely different dimensions.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's not like leveling up a character in a video game. He doesn't iterate. He just abandons a universe the second he builds it.
I think that's actually a much more accurate reading of his methodology. To understand why he jumped around so radically, you really have to look at the electronic ecosystem he was reacting against.
Right, the broader scene.
Exactly. Detroit techno, for example, was the foundational force of that era. And Detroit techno is ultimately functional. It relies on repetition and a steady pulse because its primary job is to synchronize thousands of people on a dance floor for hours.
It's designed for a specific physical utility.
Right. But Aphex Twin's music is largely non-functional. His free, unpredictable structures are so erratic they essentially reject the dance floor. But crucially, he also rejected the passive nature of traditional ambient music, which was mostly meant to be atmospheric background noise. Yeah, you can't just put Aphex Twin on in the background while you study.
Exactly. His tracks are aggressive and demanding. They force active listening. By refusing to serve a specific function, either for the club or for relaxation, he essentially deformed the entire concept of a genre.
He doesn't belong to the genre. He warps it. And that refusal to be categorized sonically links directly to his refusal to be categorized as a human being.
Oh, the personal mythology is fascinating.
It is wild. So Richard D. James was born in 1971 in Cornwall, England, and the mythology he built around himself is just as calculated as his drum programming. Over the years, he has fed the media these incredibly detailed, completely absurd stories.
Like the bank vault story.
Yes, he claimed he built a recording studio out of a bank vault after robbing it as a child. He claimed he owned a vintage military tank and drove it around the countryside to relax.
And didn't he say he composed in his sleep?
Yeah, he said he practiced lucid dreaming so he could compose entire albums while asleep, and you just wake up to write them down. Oh, and the stories of him leaving a hard drive full of unreleased, highly anticipated tracks on an airplane.
Which drives fans crazy, and we really can't forget his approach to live shows.
Oh man, the live shows are the best part. People would pay massive entry fees expecting a standard techno concert. And he would walk out, press play on a track, and literally hide inside a flight case on stage.
Or the sandpaper incident.
Right, putting a piece of sandpaper on a turntable to intentionally assault the audience with harsh noise instead of playing his hits. So here's where it gets really interesting. I have to ask, is he just a cynical artist lying for attention and trolling his audience? Or is there an actual philosophy driving this behavior?
The source material argues very strongly against the idea that he's just a troll. This is actually a deliberate philosophical strategy called information disruption.
Information disruption. Okay, how does that serve the art?
By constantly flooding the public with a mixture of verifiable facts and absurd lies, he dismantles the true image of the artist. In Western culture, we are so obsessed with the auteur.
Oh, definitely. We want the backstory.
Right. We constantly try to view the art through the lens of the artist's personal life, their trauma, their background. James neutralizes himself as a subject. He makes it completely impossible to understand the art by analyzing the man, because the man is a hall of mirrors.
So he makes the search for his authentic self so exhausting that you just give up and listen to the music.
Precisely. And you see this visually in his album covers and music videos, too. He repeatedly takes his own face, usually locked in this deeply unsettling manic grin, and digitally grafts it onto the bodies of children.
Or supermodels.
Yes, or distorts it into demonic shapes. It's a deliberate symbolization of the individual.
It is genuinely horrifying to look at sometimes.
It is, but think about the psychology behind it. The human face is our primary mechanism for connection and empathy. By twisting the most identifiable human feature, his own face, into a grotesque, ubiquitous mask, he is neutralizing the question of who is this?
He's mocking the music industry's obsession with the artist's face as a branding tool.
Exactly. By making himself a chaotic myth, he forces you to focus entirely on the audio.
It's a brilliant defense mechanism, really. And by treating identity as just another raw material to be distorted, he opened the door for a massive wave of innovation across the entire music world.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, his presence heavily shaped the IDM scene intelligent dance music, which was centered around Warp Records in the UK.
Though I know most artists absolutely hated the term intelligent dance music.
They despised it, and understandably so, because it implied that all other dance music was stupid. But the term did capture a shift. This was armchair techno. It was electronic music designed for headphones and cerebral processing rather than physical raving. And his philosophy transcended electronic music entirely. Tom York of Radiohead has been incredibly vocal about Aphex Twin's influence. When Radiohead pivoted from traditional rock to the fragmented electronic anxiety of their Kid A album, they were using Aphex Twin's methodology.
They were severing the guide wires of their own genre.
Precisely.
And when you look at the other notes in our stack today, you realize just how rich and diverse this experimental ecosystem became, because those boundaries were suddenly blown wide open. But the experimentation took entirely different forms.
Right, it wasn't all just chaotic noise.
No, not at all. For instance, right around the time Aphex Twin is releasing the dense, maximalist ambient tracks of Volume 2, you have Richie Houghton releasing his third studio album, Music, in 1994 under his Plastic Man alias.
Houghton is a perfect counterpoint here.
He really is, because if Aphex Twin severed guide wires by overloading you with chaotic data, Plastic Men severed them through extreme skeletal minimalism. Houghton would strip a track down to just a sub-bass pulse and a single echoing hi-hat.
Altering perception through sensory deprivation, essentially.
Exactly. And just like James, Houghton used an alias. He wasn't releasing this under his own name. So it wasn't just Aphex Twin playing with identity.
The adoption of aliases was practically a requirement in this era. It allowed producers to separate different sonic experiments into entirely distinct dimensions.
Look at Curtis Allen Jones in the American House scene. He was an American House producer operating simultaneously as Green Velvet, Kashmir, Curran Stone. It's like the entire genre collectively decided that tying a sound to a single, static human identity was too restrictive.
One identity just wasn't enough to contain their sound.
Exactly. If you wanted to explore aggressive techno one day and soulful house the next, you just spawned a new alias.
And this spirit of genre bending and boundary pushing was a truly global phenomenon.
Yeah.
In Scotland, you had producers like Dave Terada operating sativa recordings, injecting massive amounts of industrial noise into their sequences.
Wow.
And in Germany, a band called AOX emerged around 1999, doing something completely different. They were taking standard Roland drum machines, but running them through analog distortion pedals and guitar amps.
Ah. The notes refer to that as a techno-punk hybrid.
Yes. They weren't just making the rhythms fast, they were making the actual texture of the sound violent and abrasive. The entire experimental ecosystem of the 1990s and 2000s was thriving because the central rule of techno, that it had to be a pristine, repetitive tool, had been totally shattered.
So what does this all mean? We've covered microscopic drum shifts, fake bank robberies, sensory deprivation, and the weaponization of aliases. But distilling it all down, Aphex Twin's work isn't just weird for the sake of being weird. It is a profound methodology for handling chaos and order simultaneously.
I'd argue it's a framework we desperately need right now. Look at our modern world. We exist in a state of extreme information overload, yet our digital experiences are rigidly ordered. Complete rigid order feels incredibly boring, but complete unfiltered chaos is entirely incomprehensible.
Right. If you turn off all filters and just absorb raw, unstructured data, it's completely paralyzing.
Exactly. The new value in life and creativity is always found in that middle ground. It's the act of intentionally designing structure behind things that seem wild and free. It's the micro fluctuations in the drum machine. You don't try to eliminate chaos, you learn to orchestrate it.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. You have to build the suspension system before you take the car off-roading. I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over today.
A bit of homework.
Yeah, a bit of mental homework. If Aphex Twin proved that we find profound beauty right at the exact moment our method of understanding is forced to update, where else in your life are you clinging to old methods of understanding?
That's a great question.
Whether it's how you consume the news, tackle a complex project at work, or even how you navigate your daily routine. What might happen if you deliberately introduced a little bit of carefully designed chaos to break your own predictable rhythms? You might just find that breaking the rhythm is the only way to actually hear the music. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.